This is the Thalys, the maybe best melee in Warframe, but also super weird and inconsistent with its mechanics. The wiki doesn't have anything on that yet, but still, if you don't know all these little details, then you're gonna miss out on a lot of damage. Long story short, I did a lot of testing on this one, and in today's guide, I'm gonna tell you exactly how the Thalys works, what you need to do to get the most damage out of it, and of course, I even have multiple different builds prepared. As always, big shout out to all our generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, and now let's get right into it. Now, as per usual when we're talking about weapons, let's first talk about the basics and how the Thalys actually works. However, this time, there will be much more that you really want to know in this chapter than usual. But alright, first of all, the simple things. The Thalys is considered a heavy scythe, and that means it only has one stance mod, nothing more to add here. Looking at the stats, we have a very nice 30% crit chance with a 2.2 times multiplier and 24% status chance. That looks very good, plus we even have a relatively high damage with a total of 300. The attack speed is a bit on the lower side, but as you're going to see in a second, this isn't really going to matter. However, the range of 2.8 meters at base is quite nice. The only problem with that is that the follow-through stat is only 40%, meaning if you hit multiple enemies with the same strike, only the first enemy is going to take the full damage, and every subsequent enemy is going to take 40% of the damage that the enemy before took. So that goes down relatively quickly if you hit bigger groups, as you can also see here, fully modded, but still we're dealing single-digit damage. These are the base stats, but of course, the Thalys is not just a normal melee weapon, it is an incarnon. And unlike most of the other incarnon weapons in the game, this one is a, let's just say, natural incarnon, because you don't need an incarnon adapter. It works basically like the original incarnons. And man, does this thing have some great perks. First off, just like with other incarnon melees, in order to transform it, you need to go up to a 6 times combo multiplier, do a heavy attack, and then the incarnon form will be on for 90 seconds. Transforming the Thalys into its incarnon mode will give you a whopping plus 3 meter range, so that is like having a free primed reach, and on top of that, plus 40% attack speed. That's why I originally said that the low attack speed doesn't matter. This thing is gonna make it pretty quick. However, that's not all. There is a specific mechanic that makes it that whenever you hit an enemy with the incarnon form, they're gonna grow a void shard, you can see it right there, and whenever you apply a void shard to another enemy, then all pre-existing void shards will deal 75% of your weapon damage to their respective enemies. So it kinda allows you to deal AoE damage similar to melee influence. However, this is the point of the video where we need to talk about the very weird and inconsistent mechanics. Quick disclaimer, what I'm about to say might or might not change in the future. When it comes to these void shards, the description is very simple. It says 75% of your weapon's damage. But I was curious, what does weapon damage really mean in that case? So I tested multiple different types of damage, and man, is it all over the place. Let's get into it. First of all, modded base damage on the Thalys is also going to increase the damage that the void shards deal, so base damage works. However, condition overload, which technically should also count as base damage, but it doesn't work at all. I tested it in multiple different ways, and at no point did it ever increase the damage that those shards dealt. Up next, faction damage does not work either. Would have been too cool if. But then again, something like elemental damage that everybody would believe will naturally work, again, does not do anything. Next, any damage increases stemming from your combo multiplier also have no influence on the shards. However, shard damage is influenced by enemy armor or viral procs, so if you armor strip the enemy and prime them, the void shards will deal much more damage. But, and this is the big but, if you thought that was already complicated, let's talk about crit. First of all, no matter what you mod in terms of crit chance on your weapon, the void shards simply do not care. However, if you use flat sources of increased crit chance, like Kalervo's Wrathful Advance, then all of a sudden the shards can crit. And the fun thing here is that unlike for the crit chance, when it comes to the crit damage that those shards deal, that again then does seem to scale with the crit damage that you modded on the Thalys. It is overall very weird. And then finally, one more thing that I should say here is, as far as my testing goes, the void shards can't inflict status effects, and also they're only applied to enemies that you physically hit with the Thalys, so if you trigger melee influence on the Thalys, then this is not going to spread the shards. You have to touch the enemy with a physical blade, which shouldn't be all that much of a deal because the Thalys has a really high range. And as always, like the video or a void shard will grow out of your head. Thanks so much for your support. But, of course, since the Thalys is an incarnon weapon, we naturally have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that would be the incarnon evolutions. First of all, Evolution 1 does the same thing that I previously said, plus 3 meters range, plus 40% attack speed, very, very nice. Evolution 1, though, already poses the first question because we have 3 actually pretty viable options here. Either we get plus 0.1 meters of range for 8 seconds every time we do a weapon status effect. This shouldn't be all too much of a problem with a 24% base chance, so we can expect this to be a constant plus 2 meter range, which further extends the already long weapon. Then we have a general plus 20% attack speed, which is also very, very nice. Remember, we got 40% from this one, plus 20% from here is a innate plus 60% attack speed. And then lastly, if we wanted to go for slide attacks, this will massively increase the attack speed for sliding. I think this one right here is the least meta, so to speak, and those ones here depend on what you personally want to go for. If you want to hit as many enemies as possible, go for Dreadful Reach. If you just want to have a very fast attacking light attack setup, then go with Whirling Flurry. Evolution 3 is pretty straightforward, I would say. This is all focused on your combo. My personal favorite here is Adept Reflexes, giving you plus 20 initial combo, which is very nice specifically for heavy attack builds, because that means you have more initial combo multiplier, increasing heavy attack damage. However, if you rather want to build up combo faster, you could go for something like this here, plus 1 combo count whenever one of your shards deal damage. That can scale up very quickly. And then right here, one that is more focused on slide attacks again. Honestly, I think the slide attack thing with this weapon isn't all too amazing. I would personally go for this one, or if you really struggle with the combo buildup, maybe Echoes of Rage 2. Now, Evolution 4 is where it gets pretty darn interesting. On the one hand, we have ground finishers knock enemies down in a 6 meter radius. I think the idea behind this is very cool, but I would like the radius to be a bit bigger. With this one, essentially, you could chain together ground finishers. I think it's a bit gimmicky. I don't think it's necessary, but it's a cool idea. This one right here is a very, very interesting one, and we're going to talk about this a bit more once we get to the builds. Plus 100% jump and double jump height. With this, you can jump pretty darn high. And lastly, this is the ultimate convenience option. This makes it that you only need to get up to a 3 times combo multiplier and then heavy attack to activate the incarnon form instead of the standard 6x. I don't think it's much of a problem, but you do you right here, doesn't really matter. And then finally, the 5th evolution. This has all to do with these void shards that we previously talked about, because this gives you 3 different functionalities in which way you can use them. The first one here would be Void Splinters, and this is incredibly weird. Either I'm completely dumb or I misunderstood something, but in my testing they just didn't work at all. What it says is, the duration that the shards will be on the enemy is increased to 30 seconds, so it takes a long time for them to go away. And these shards turn into weak spots on the enemy, where you get plus 100% crit chance when you damage that weak spot. Also, the damage that the shards themselves deal is reduced by 50%. So to me, this sounds like it should work kinda sorta like Citrine's 4th skill, where the crystals grow out of the enemy and then you do red crits on them. But no matter what I did, I just couldn't get it to work. If I put the shard on an enemy and then fire with a weapon added, it didn't seem that the weapon had any higher crit chance. And then if it doesn't count for other weapons, why use it in the first place? Because the shards grow out of the enemy's heads? And how are you gonna consistently hit headshots with a melee weapon like this? So to me, I don't know if everything right here works exactly the way it's supposed to, or if there might be some bugs. But I wouldn't recommend it because I just couldn't get it to work. It seems like it doesn't work at all to me. Next option would be Chain Shatter. This makes it that when an enemy has a shard on them and you hit that enemy with a heavy attack, then the shard detonates and every other shard in that detonation radius will also detonate. It's kind of nice, specifically if you want to go for a light attack build where you occasionally use Tennokai to do the heavy attack. This, I think, is a viable option in that case. But another great tool will be explosive growth. This makes it that a shard can grow up to 3 times, like when you hit that enemy 3 times, and once they're fully grown, they impale the enemy for a short period of time, dealing double damage. I think both of these two are viable. Just go for whichever you personally prefer or what synergizes best with your build. For this one though, maybe you can educate me in the comments what I'm doing wrong here, but I just couldn't get it to work. But now, let's talk about what you probably came here for in the first place, and that would be the builds. In this video, I have 3 different builds prepared for you. Yes, that's right, 3, because the Thalys has quite the different options available for you. On the one hand, we're going to talk about a standard light attack build, but you can also play it into heavy attacks, and I even have a heavy slam build for you. Yes, that's right, slams got nerfed, but the Thalys is still very, very good at that, and we're going to take a look at all of it, starting out with the standard light attack build. When it comes to this build, the first thing I quickly want to go over again would be the evolutions, because depending on which build you go for, you do want to have different ones. For the light attack build in the second slot, we're going to go for the one that gives us more range so that we can hit more enemies at the same time. If you wanted to, you could also go for the attack speed, but I think we already get enough of that, so more range it is. In slot number 3, we do want to go for the one that gives us more combo whenever a shard deals damage to scale up our combo faster. Initial combo doesn't really matter for a light attack build, so that is what we go for. In slot number 4, it doesn't matter at all. If you want to jump high, you can go for that, but if the jump height increase kind of bothers you because it messes with your muscle memory, then just go for the 3x combo requirement. That way you can get into incarnon mode much easier. And then in the last one, go with whatever you like. As I said, this one kind of couldn't get it to work. Either go for the one that detonate the shards so that your Tennokai attacks will be able to deal AoE damage, or if you don't really want to go for Tennokai or don't feel like it, go for this one here. That is much more consistent if you don't want to weave in those heavy attacks. For the arcane in the light attack build, of course, we're talking about the one and only melee influence. We have such a high range with this weapon that we kind of sort of have to go with melee influence on a light attack build. Everything else is just objectively inferior, the rest being absolute standard. For a light attack combo build, we're gonna get our crit chance from Blood Rush and our status chance from Weeping Wounds. We, of course, go for base damage with Prime Pressure Point, although you could go for Condition Overload if you have some decent status priming going on. Remember though, that the damage from your Void Shards will not be affected by Condition Overload, so if you want them to actually deal some numbers, then keep it at Prime Pressure Point, whatever you personally prefer. Since we're having melee influence, of course, we go with Shocking Touch to increase electricity. If you wanted to, you could also go for a 60-60 here, doesn't make all too much of a difference. And that also means Elementalist mod to further increase that elemental damage with a faction damage mod. Galvanized Steel for the crit damage. Yes, it is a crit chance mod, but it still deals more crit damage than the crit damage mod does. And then the last slot is kind of optional. You could go for even more attack speed with Berserker Fury. This will make you crazy fast. But if you wanted to, you could also go Primed Reach and increase the range by another 3 meters. I think that's pretty hilarious. Up to your personal preference, or you just go with something else completely. In the Tennokai slot, I went for Opportunities Reach, because this way our heavy attacks with the Tennokai have 3 meters more radius on top of that, so I think with the Thalys this is going to be a bit hilarious, especially if you go for the evolution that detonates the Void Shards, and overall this is, your standard melee influence build. Up next, let's talk about the heavy attack build, where again we need to adjust our incarnon evolutions a little bit for that. In the third slot, we go from the previously +1 combo count on shard damage to the +20 initial combo. I don't think I need to have to explain all too much here. Heavy attack build once initial combo, so that's the objectively right choice here. And in the last one, of course, we use the one that makes heavy attacks detonate shards. No brainer on a heavy attack build, of course. Now, when it comes to the build itself, I first want to take a quick look at the combos here, because the interesting thing with heavy scythes is that if you use a heavy attack build, then the heavy attack is actually a multi-hit combo where we have a forced proc slash and a forced knockdown, as you can see here. And because of the fact that we apply a slash before knocking an enemy down, that naturally means in the arcane slot we go for melee afflictions that will take that 1 slash and amp it up to 7. Now, because we're going to have that much of a massive range, that means the damage from the initial hit is not going to be all that powerful on most enemies that we hit, but since damage over time in Warframe is still very darn strong, that's what we focus on a little bit. So naturally, Elementalist to increase that bleed damage, together with Primed Smite Grineer, Galvanized Reflex to further increase the initial combo, thereby increasing our total damage. If you wanted to, you could also use a Ready Steel on your Warframe to increase that even more. However, that's personal preference. I think the damage is already pretty good. Galvanized Steel as well as Amalgam Organ Shatter for crit chance and crit damage. Here we use the Amalgam one because it increases the heavy attack wind-up speed, which is also the reason why we get our base damage from killing Blow right here. Does the same thing. And the last two, Berserker Fury and Primed Rage, that's up to you. If you wanted to, you could reduce the range a bit for getting even more damage, or you put in an element, whatever you like. These two are a bit more optional. And then the final build on today's list, and that is a little bit of an exotic one right here, would be the Heavy Slam build. I know Heavy Slam got nerfed in the recent update, but I think the Thalys is uniquely equipped to still deal pretty darn good numbers with it. Let's get into it. First of all, in the evolutions, we keep everything as it was with the heavy attack build, except one difference, that being in the fourth one, we go for the additional jump height. Reason for that is that the way they changed heavy slams is that the damage radius on impact depends on how high you were when you initiated the slam, definitely very good on a slam build. For the build itself, I went for melee exposure just to further increase our overall damage, prime pressure point for the base damage, shock and touch and fever strike to get even more corrosive damage, seismic wave to increase slam damage, and then also here galvanized reflex for the initial combo, crit chance, crit damage, pretty standard stuff. One more very important thing here for the slam build, definitely make sure to use Naira's Hatred as well as Naira's Anguish on your Warframe, because these two massively increase damage from slam attacks. No, slam build is really good without them. And then you're definitely gonna deal multiple millions of damage. It might not be as crazy as slams were pre-nerf, but I would say the Thalys is still pretty darn good at it. And if you want to see the, in my opinion, best secondary weapon in Warframe, then definitely check out this video next. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nox Linux Gaming, Turtle Pier, Underconio 2, Skylar Bowser, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Shadow Lockhart, Troller Loxon, Antares, Patricider, Christopher S. Mawson, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.